Hi, Jazz.
It's lovely to be here today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited that you're here. And honestly, I was thinking about, I think my biggest challenge is going to be how I'm going to manage my time and my enthusiasm, because I think every time that I speak with you or I read one of your posts or papers, my curiosity just lights up. And I think you've got such an amazing way of connecting so many
Imagine what
important
it's like having
topics,
two of us in the room.
science. So thank you so much for joining. And for anyone listening, I started this project, Mastering Mindset, where I'm really fascinated on exploring mindset and how that becomes a skill set for navigating growth, leadership, and the future of work. And I think the more and more that, I've been in my own coaching work, I've realized how important it is in education and workforce skilling that we really focus on the mindset and how it bridges between what we know and what we can do and how we show up. A lot of the work that Jazz you're doing is really centers around that evolution of the human side. And I think as we progress and we co-create with AI or co-work with AI and co-live with AI, I think it's super important that we don't lose that side of the progress of our energy and emotional intelligence and capacity for meaning and connection. I'm super excited to have this conversation recorded because we've had many conversations, but I've always wanted to create a space where we can also keep that for others to listen to. I could easily spend a whole 5 minutes introducing you and your achievements, but I think it's far more interesting to hear it from you. And you probably have one of the most fascinating backgrounds that I've come across, this idea that of journeying through many different worlds that I think most people never even come across in a single lifetime. Your background in medicine and biology and Chinese medicine, technology, astrophysics, space sciences, and working on so many interesting projects, as well as your coaching and thought leadership in the coaching world and being involved with many interesting programs like Coaching 5.0 and Industry 5.0. I'm super interested to hear, how did all of that come together? What is in your own words, how would you describe your journey and what's the connection between all those worlds?
Well, a colleague of mine had interviewed me recently for a book. It's Haroon Rouhani. He was writing this book called Raising Titans. And it's a story about people who've gone through struggle and somehow still made it in life. And, I've been through my struggles. When I was younger, I was being bullied a lot at school. And he said something really interesting. He said, out of that, because I was constantly on edge and needing to be very observant to keep out of the way of those bullies, that ability to observe to very high levels actually got me into coaching. It got me into helping other people to learn. It got me to be really curious about things. Even if I look at where I am today, it's always been a journey to try and look at how do I learn, I can be true to myself. And that's a really simple kind of request to make of yourself, but it's not easy at all to actually carry out. So for most of my life, I've always been curious. And the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to get as far away from those bullies as I could. And the furthest place I could think of was outer space. I thought that's about the furthest place I can go. So I thought I need to become an astronaut. I did actually go on and do a degree in astrophysics at Queen Mary College. But it was there that I learned about astronauts who'd gone through shifts in their consciousness while they were in space. And I thought, rather than going to NASA and become a mission specialist, which is what I wanted to do, I'm more interested in what's going on in their brains as they're up there in space, what's leading them to shift their consciousness and have these kind of awakenings. And instead, I went and did a master's degree studying the brain and how it functions, looking at drugs that act on the brain. And I looked at how the brain affects our immune system and our wellness. And as a consequence of that, I was asked to teach on how the mind affects the body for a good 5 or 6 years in colleges all over the UK and abroad. And it's that mind-body medicine that took me into Chinese medicine and martial arts. And I started learning how people mastered themselves in ancient times, as well as modern times. And I thought, Western models of coaching, they only seem to use Western models of psychology. And it's crazy that they're not using these wisdom traditions that have been around for thousands of years. So I built my own model, and in 2008, I actually integrated it and coded it into my own AI coaching platform. So I wrote the code from scratch, and this is long before the days of ChatGPT or anything like that. And it was built on the principle of resonance, because social media and other platforms were focusing on relevance. They were focusing on what people's interests were, their preferences and their behaviors, and that's how they connected people. And I thought, it's creating this big echo chamber, and we need to also start connecting people by their intentions, their priorities, and their way of being, these deeper factors. And these are resonance factors. And that's what my platform was built on. And it spent, many years working with that alongside of being at university, where I was a research fellow and was doing research into technology enhanced learning. I did end up going to work at NASA, the International Space Station base in Italy, in Turin. And it was working with astronaut trainers with the latest technologies, AI, virtual reality, to improve the performance of the astronauts before they go up to the space station, but also prepare some of them for future Mars missions as well. And when I finished that, I came back fully into coaching. And I realized just at this time, this was the time then AI was beginning to rear its head into coaching. And I thought, I've landed at a perfect time, because this is something I can really contribute to. Yeah, a couple of years later, that was in 2022, at the end of 2022. A couple of years later now, I'm working with the EMCC as their global research lead. And last year, I introduced the incentive or the imperative that we really need to get aligned in our coaching skills to how human intelligence and artificial intelligence harmonize in terms of the way they work with each other. That's very industry 5.0, fifth industrial revolution kind of way of thinking, where we're focusing on human flourishing and human well-being for the first time instead of advancing some kind of technology necessarily. But the beauty of it is, if we can use this stuff to advance our humanity in a virtuous kind of way, we will end up with humanity that's much more advanced in the future than where we are currently. We don't want to end up with a humanity that's dumber because the machines have got smarter. We want to be at least as smart and intelligent as the machines. And that's my kind of passion, to keep things humanity-centric in a way that allows us to keep what's sacred about our potential. And the most recent thing I've been working on actually draws on something that was first put out 6 years ago. And maybe it's something we'll talk about. It's called Sacred AI. It's about how do we work with this technology while preserving what's sacred within us as human beings. And I don't necessarily mean spiritual. What I mean is, what is the most empowering, insightful, amazing things about what it is to have humanity within us. Yeah. That's where I've got to. It's been a bit of a journey, and it's strange how it began, but it's interesting where it ended up.
Fascinating. It's a fascinating journey, and I love the way that you've been framed that kind of, you start from that sort of struggle of bullying and how you kind of shape that into this now a mission that is focused on keeping that sacredness of our humanity. I read your post recently where you make the distinction between human-centered versus humanity-centered. And I thought that was beautifully framed in that sort of...
It makes me look at people and think, you really haven't looked closely at what it is you want to be true to. And if you just want to be working with the lowest common denominators and just focus on being human and not work with the highest common denominators that we share to do with our humanity, then you're still operating on the surface. You're still scratching the surface, and you haven't gone deep enough in how you think you want to work with this technology in a way that empowers you and leads you to a higher state within yourself as a human being.
And it's such an interesting distinction. It kind of really makes it, because there's so much talk about human-centered leadership or human-centered coaching or a lot of that sort of organization as we learn how to co-live with AI. But even taking it further to humanity-centered opens up a whole new, I think, reality for us to explore. And for those people who are not as familiar with Industry 5.0, Coaching 5.0, Coaching 5.0, I'd love for you to just explain it. Where's the connection?
Well, big paradigm shifts in society have always typically been accompanied by things like industrial revolutions. So the first happened in the 1700s when people started mechanizing textile production. There's the assembly line of Henry Ford. There's the computer revolution in the 50s and 60s. And then there's the Internet of Things, where everything got connected by various devices through the internet. But around 2015 onwards, we got to a position where people realized that human beings and their humanity and their flourishing and their well-being were being left behind in industry. And unless we dealt with that, there weren't going to be any human beings around to do any work. So the fifth industrial revolution emerged, and there was a call to specifically look at how our flourishing, our well-being could be maintained and sustained, also while respecting the environment in terms of sustainability on the outside. But the three things that were the key are parts of that revolution, and they really accelerated with COVID when everybody was stuck at home and the flourishing and well-being were really important, and workplace became a secondary thing. The three key things were, first of all, getting human intelligence and artificial intelligence to couple together in a way where they reciprocally advanced each other, where human intelligence could advance artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence in turn could advance human intelligence, but not just for the sake of getting more intelligent, but actually helping us to become more advanced as a civilization, as a species. But part of that requirement was to also make sure, given how much demands AI and other technologies make on the environment, that that is something that's made sustainable, because we can't continue to be more and more intelligent if we're doing dumber and dumber things with the planet. We're just not going to survive that. The environment will kick back and it'll take us out. That's what evolution typically does. So I'm doing a talk later on this week where I'm looking at, well, if we're going to do this and achieve outer sustainability, outer meeting of targets like to do with carbon footprint and net zero targets, as they're called, we actually need to begin on the inside. We need to achieve inner net zero targets. And inner net zero targets about conservation of energy on the inside of us. Those people who can't conserve energy within themselves, between their motivation, their intention, and their attention, they run out of motivation. They stop paying attention and they can't form clear intentions. And these people are not likely to be sensitive enough to know about how energy runs out in the real world and how resources run out in the real world. So when it becomes personal, and we have a personal experience of what happens when we have a lack of sustainability with our own energy, with our own attention, intention, and motivation, those people will register the stuff that's going on in the outside world. And they'll say, oh, this isn't just an idea or a number somewhere. It's personal for me. Now, I know what it's like to run out of energy. I know what it's run out of resources because I can't work. I can't, think clearly. I can't even look after myself. So this idea of internet zero, I think, is the kind of area I'm trying to converge the Industry 5.0 thoughts around human flourishing and technology working together. I'm trying to get things to move into that space. Let's begin with ourselves. Let's handle inner climate change first. And if we can do that, we're probably in a position to start handling outer climate change, for example.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying. It kind of resonates so much with me. I think as you and I have talked, a lot of my coaching has also been focused on energy management and really understanding what is energy from a mental perspective, from an emotional perspective, from a physical, because we tend to minimize the language of energy when it comes to us. It's mainly around, yes, I have a lot of energy or I don't. Or it just seems to be minimized to that physical energy. And a lot of the times, if people feeling like they don't have a lot of energy, it's usually goes down to whether, you've had enough sleep or food, which are all fantastic and really important. But we tend to ignore the importance of emotional and mental sustainability of that.
For somebody who's a leader or a manager looking after people, that those people know if their employees are no longer motivated, if their employees can't pay attention to their job, especially where there are a lot of risks and liabilities, if those employees can't form clear intentions with regards to how they plan and develop strategy and tactics to do things, then that internal operations of that business are no longer going to be sustainable. People often think sustainability is just something to do with stuff out there in the world, to do with climate change. But actually, no, inside a business, there's a sustainability of operations. There's a sustainability of your staff and your employees and your workforce. And if you can't generate sustainability of your operations through sustainability of your human beings, your business isn't going to last.
But even yourself,
yeah.
It sounds, a lot of leaders, as you said, I mean, we tend to look outside for things that first we need to look inside. we're looking for sustainability outside, where we first need to also understand, not first, but in parallel, we need to understand how we're sustaining ourselves. Same with leadership. If we're always thinking about, well, how are others connecting intention? We need to also understand how we're doing it. And I think
It's like
that's where you're
charity,
also looking at.
charity, like compassion, like collaboration, and like conservation of energy. They all begin at home. They all begin at home.
Yeah, and the culture. And I think it's like even culture. So I love what you're doing in the world, and I love the mission that you're on. Even diversity, I think I was reflecting on that. We always look for diversity of how we're thinking about it around other people. How much do we understand diversity inside ourselves? How much do we actually accept different parts of who we are? Diversity starts within, I think once we are able to accept different parts of our own humanity, we have a much bigger potential to practice diversity outside ourselves. So I
The
think
challenge
even
is, how do we
that.
use technology to enhance all these things? And one of the things, especially about diversity, that many people don't register is that in nature, if you go into a jungle or an ecosystem there isn't a single kind of diversity. There isn't just diversity of species, for example. There's diversity of
Mm,
environments. There's also diversity of actual, dynamics between different species, for example, in terms of interaction, predator and prey, all this kind of stuff, right? So when we look at human beings in the workforce, we can't just consider diversity of people, for example.
yeah.
We need to also look at how that integrates with diversity of technologies. And whenever you've tried to roll out
Mm,
diversity in an organization, typically it's failed because it hasn't integrated well with the other kind of diversities that are in that organization. And then people say, oh, diversity doesn't work. Well, it would if you properly integrated it with the other kind of diversities there are. There's a lot of complexity in business.
mm,
And if you can't integrate
yes,
diversity in a respectful way with the existing complexity, then it will look complicated. It's complexity, but it doesn't need to be complicated. That's what unfortunately a lot of people do. They see complexity and they see complex, but actually it's something that's very, very sophisticated when you understand it. Until you understand it,
mm,
it looks complex. But once you understand it, you go, oh, all this complexity is necessary, and it's actually quite sophisticated. And when you do bring people in and you're trying to improve diversity, it's really hard to try and integrate diversity into something that's got a lot of complexity to it. But it helps if you understand the
yeah,
complexity of people. Because when you understand the complexity of people, it's easier to join that complexity up with the complexity that's already there, And technology can
yeah,
help. Technologies like AI, they can identify things like motivation and intention and attention, and that at large scales, they can actually lead to those kind of activities within human beings to merge and marry with those kind of activities within technology infrastructure. Even AIs, have to pay attention. Even AIs have to be given intentions, and marrying the two sets of motivation, intention, and attention between human beings and AIs is hard enough. But the big challenge a lot of people are facing at the moment is not actually to do with the human AI connection. It's actually ensuring that how AIs work with each other and how they collaborate with each other, that they do it in a way that
mm,
respects motivation, intention, and attention, because ultimately that's what they're going to answer to within human beings. But if they can't handle that within themselves and they go off and start hallucinating and doing other stuff, then they're ultimately not going to be very useful in advancing the human intelligence. So those three resources are not just for human beings, especially around collaboration and conservation. When AIs run out of these things, they don't end up with particularly useful outcomes in terms of what they put out.
and so tell us a little bit more about coaching 5.0 and how that intersects with the whole industry 5.0 and the intention of that.
Well, Industry 5.0 said about harmonizing human and machine intelligence in a way where they reciprocally advance one another while respecting sustainability on the outside in the environment, and also respecting sustainability on the inside of people's inner environments. And this is where coaching is particularly useful, because if you look at the intersection between people ecosystems and technology ecosystems and environmental ecosystems, those intersections, how these systems interact with each other, That's where a lot of organizational development and operational work actually is adapting and changing, because people are no longer interacting with technology ecosystems in the way that they used to. Because previously it used to be a mechanical interface, it was something that didn't necessarily have intelligence at that interface, except only on the human side. Now, the technology ecosystems have intelligence on their side too. And in the past, people used to ignore that. But now people are realizing, oh, hang on a minute, the stuff that we do with our intelligence, with technology and its intelligence, actually has a knock-on effect and influences and is interactive, affected by the intelligence of nature too. And if we keep ignoring that intelligence and we're only paying attention to the intelligence within human beings and people ecosystems, and the intelligence in technology infrastructures, especially recently more with different AI systems and how they interact with each other, we're missing a big part of the equation. So the big challenge is these intersections, these interfaces, there are human beings that typically have to oversee these things. And I realized a little while ago that the main challenges that human beings have are centered around how they're learning, where they're learning in bite-sized pieces, what's called micro-learning, how they then join that up in a way they learn together with other people around them. That's peer-to-peer learning. That has to be done on an ongoing basis, which is continuous learning. And then finally, hopefully it serves a lifetime of what that person's doing, whether it's a project, whether it's their career, whether it's a job. So that's lifelong learning. All of those things feed into each other. But there's a key aim for workforce kind of incentives and strategies, which is any learning people do, whether it's done from school or university or learning and development within an organization, it's got to yield and generate transferables. Transferables are transferable knowledge, transferable skills, transferable data, information. Even AIs have to generate transferable stuff, and they have to learn too, right? But these transferables also include transferable duty, transferable responsibility, transferable power. So these are the assets that come out of the learning. However, someone's got to do the transferring, right? And it's going to be human beings in the first instance. They're going to collaborate. They're going to use their critical thinking and emotional and social intelligence to work with each other to transfer those skills and that knowledge to other people, to other systems. And those synergy skills to do with collaboration and connection and communication and distribution, that comes full circle back to the learning and advances the learning. So it's a virtuous kind of circle. But the problem is that the intersections of these things between learning and transferable skills and knowledge and other kind of assets like that, and those things actually being transferred by other people at these intersections, this is where coaching, mentoring, learning, development, therapy, that's where they do their work. Now, when it's not therapy related or people have got learning problems as such, then it's about development usually. It's about helping people to develop and realize their potential through their learning to generate transferable skills and knowledge to other people, and even transfer skills from one part of their life to another, for example. And then that hopefully will enhance their collaboration and critical thinking, compassion, and social and emotional intelligence. All those things will happen. All this stuff, that's what coaching deals with. And how these things are dealt with in Industry 5.0 environments, which are harmonizing human and machine intelligence, respecting the outer environment, respecting the inner environment. Fundamentally, this is a job of coaches. And in the future, coaches may very well be the most highest paid individuals there are, because they're not just coaching humans, they're actually coaching AIs. AIs have to learn from somewhere how to generate transferable skills and knowledge and data and information, and then do that transfer through communication, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, all those kind of things. Soft skills are not just for human beings. AIs need to learn them too. And this is where coaching is critical. So coaching 5.0 is coaching that's oriented towards working in those spaces where human intelligence and artificial intelligence are being harmonized, the environment's being respected, the inner environments of people to do with their motivation, intention, and attention. So anything that works in those spaces with those kind of assets, those kind of learning, those kind of collaborative communication, synergy generating activities, That's coaching 5.0. It's serving the fifth industrial revolution spaces and activities.
In the mission to harmonize and bring in the harmony between machines and humans in the
If it's done
workforce.
right,
I love
we
that.
should see humanity advance
If
as a
it's right.
consequence. Not human beings and their jobs and their skills and knowledge. We should see what it is to have our deeper humanity not just be connected to better and experienced. It will advance collectively at scale. And as a species, as a civilization, the human race, if you like, its humanity will be elevated. Its higher common denominators of its amazing qualities will be elevated, and lowest common denominators will start to get left behind. And these are the signs of an advanced civilization. It's a civilization that works with the highest common denominators of life, and it's let go of the lowest common denominators, because how else is it going to be elevated if it's just working with the lowest common denominators? It has to work with the highest ones if it wants to get to a higher place in its existence, right?
And as you said, if it's done right, it has this sort of, as you're speaking, yes, coaching would be one of the most essential, and foundational type of industries that can even empower, machines and the harmony and industry 5.0. So it's fantastic to really kind of see that the line of thinking that this can really take us, and the intention. And yet at the same time, you've got on the other side where there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of people worrying about actually machines are going to be making us dumber, or our kids or our education system is going downhill. So there's a lot of fear for the next generation, and how AI is going to actually take us away from our humanity. Where the picture that you're actually, I guess, portraying for us is that we can actually elevate our humanity. So what are the biggest challenges that you see right now?
Well, about a year ago, I was speaking with the director of justice, from the Ministry of Justice here in the UK, because I do some government work. And he was saying how he was using ChatGPT to process probation applications. And I was thinking, whoa, hang on a minute. Do you really want to be doing that with AI? And I raised the flag and I said, look, if you keep doing that and you keep defaulting to what's convenient for you, because that's what a lot of people are doing with AI, then the consequence of that defaulting to convenience is that your competence will end up atrophying. And over time, that means you're less and less able to do your job. And if you're handing stuff over to AI constantly and you're practicing and behaving like a robot more and more, you probably are going to get replaced by a robot. Now, there's a phrase that a lot of people might be familiar with, which is a culture eats strategy for breakfast. All right. In a similar way, we're discovering now that convenience is something that eats competence for breakfast. If it's a convenient way of doing something, people will do it. It's just human nature. It's happened long before AI
Self-driving
was.
cars.
Sorry?
Self-driving cars. I was having a conversation with a friend, and we were talking about self-driving cars. And I was saying, well, how great would it be if the next generation, there's safety, there's obviously, the kids, none of the parents have to worry about, the whole pain of, your kids learning how to drive and not having an accident. So to me, that was like safety, similar to what you're saying, convenience. And safety almost eats competence. And the conversation we end up having is, yes, actually, if self-driving cars are here right now and our kids end up being in those, maybe they're safer, but they will never learn all the competencies that our generation learned in driving a car.
It's something
And
I
I
flagged
think
recently. I said, look, the government at the highest scales are trying to work with technology in with a particular order of priority. The first is security. The last thing they want is their system to be hacked, right? The second is safety. And people often conflate security and safety. And they're two very different things. And I use the example that you can be in a house which is very secure and its doors are locked and everything, but it doesn't mean, if there's a murderer inside, you're not going to be safe, even though it's secure. And the next most important thing is innovation. And the last thing is actually ethics. Now, interestingly, they put ethics last because sometimes until security and safety is in place, there's not much
Mm.
point of doing innovation. There's not much point even considering ethics and where things are right or wrong. First, get things secure, then get them safe. Then you're in a place where you can afford to do innovation. And usually after the fact, when people realize what the innovation can do and can't do and the risks and the liabilities it generates, only then can you get a full picture of how it needs to be worked with ethically. You can go in with some ground rules, certainly, but often stuff comes up that you never would have planned for in the first place. That's why typically ethics has to be put last, because you just don't know what could come up in terms of innovation. The innovation itself could undermine the safety and security, for example, in which case you're going to need, guardrails for that kind of stuff, right?
Mm. But we don't actually think about innovation taking away our competence. That's an interesting topic that you're bringing as well. So one of the challenges, as you're saying, is that we underestimate how much we're giving our competence away in exchange of convenience and safety and security that we're giving away our competence. So how would we balance that? To gain competence takes effort. So if we are, I think naturally we're inclined to take safety and convenience as human species. How much energy does it take to really go after competence?
Well, I'll give you an example where the opposite is actually true, and this helps us inform us what we need to do. I was at a government meeting recently, and they were talking about the digital divide in the country, how some people have access to digital services, the internet and so on, computers, and other people don't. And I'm trying to address the digital divide, trying to get more people, digitally literate. They want to get 21 million people in the UK literate with digital technologies. And out of that, they want to get 7 million workers AI literate. And I raised a flag and I said, look, have you noticed how many people who are using AI are beginning to learn empathy through AI? They're developing a digital form of empathy. Now, when you put these people against the normal, regular people whose empathy has been developed through human connections and organic kind of exchanges with real relationships, you have two kinds of empathy. You've got a digital form of empathy, and you've got an organic, real form of empathy. And it's very likely that the people who are exposed to these technologies, in addressing the digital divide, a side effect of actually getting people competent in digital technologies is that they'll start to become incompetent in human skills and human qualities. And people looked at me like I'd thrown a grenade into the room, and everybody looked at me that, how come we didn't even think of this before? They didn't like the idea by addressing the digital divide, you're going to create an empathy divide. And do we want that for the future of humanity? Do we want an empathy divide?
Yeah. But I'm now starting to sense that almost everything seems to be a little bit of a exchange of, it's like as human species, we're almost exchanging something in as we're gaining something. As you're speaking, I'm kind of like my mind
and get downskilled in another.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah, it
so
just
that
seems
harmonization,
like
that's the challenge. That's the future challenge.
yeah. It's a massive challenge because now I'm thinking even in our home or for the next generation or at work. And another thing is we need to consider the limitations of time, because I think we have limited time to learn or develop in a certain area. So I think a lot of the times in learning and enablement work that we were doing with massive organization and digital literacy work, you're always challenged by the attention and the time that humans
in
have.
response to your question about how do we deal with this, I was at Cambridge University recently, and a colleague of mine who's a business analyst was sitting with me at dinner after we just done this presentation on coaching and AI. And I said to him, when I've gone into organizations with my business analysis hat on, often I meet people in corridors and they say, oh, you're Jazz. And I'm looking at them and going, I guess I am. I'm the person who looks at both sides and say, hold on, there's something we haven't considered yet. But it could be an opportunity, a positive thing, or it could be a negative thing where it could be a risk or a liability. And that's the job often of business analysts, that they're there to show the complexity of caveats that need to be considered for change and transformation in businesses. And in coaching, it's certainly the case that when you're working with your clients, if you're not there to reveal the caveats that will help them make the best of what they've got in front of them and avoid risks and liabilities in the process of working with new technologies like AI, then you're not really doing your job. There's a lack of due diligence and duty of care if you're not showing what the caveats are, right? So I don't mind being called the caveat guy because at least it alerts people to things that they've not seen that they have to take accountability around and responsibility around. And ultimately, the accountability and responsibility that we develop, that's going to determine how effectively we harmonize how we are as human beings, our human intelligence, with how we work with technologies like AI. So, yeah, let's all be more caveat centric, in terms of how we coach and watch how that goes.
I love that because I think I've been also reflecting on we need almost like a new wisdom muscle on to make those decisions of, what are the distinctions or what am I not seeing? It's also another leadership skill to be able to see what others are not seeing and being able to bring that into awareness. You also posted something recently on the C4 framework, which nicely ties into this. Talk us about that.
I saw a lot of people using AI and using prompts to do various kinds of activities and tasks. And there's a lot of frameworks out there on how you can do a prompt, choose a role, choose a context, whatever. And I thought, for a humanity-centric future, is there a structure for prompting in a generative AI that is going to help people keep things humanity-centric? And I thought, well, the most basic lower common denominator everybody wants to answer to is to generate content of some kind. Okay, it could be generate content for an email or summarize something, for example. So that's the lowest level of concern for most people, content. That's one of the C's of the C4 kind of framework. The next level up is, okay, you want to do an email, you want to craft some content, but you want to do it with a certain context in mind. And when you're thinking of context, you're usually thinking of, well, what kind of environment am I doing this for? Am I doing this for, a particular department in a business? Am I doing it for a particular market segment? What kind of forces are at work that I need to consider? These kind of things. So that's context. But just above context, that very few people seem to really register, is conscience. And conscience is, okay, you got your content and your context, but that's to do with what you want to generate and how. But there's a question as to why. Why are you trying to do this? What is it you're trying to align to in terms of values and in terms of intention, for example? So above context engineering and content engineering is what I would call intention engineering. And when I put together my AI coaching platform back in 2008, I was training coaches, and I said, look, this is run on intention engineering. It's all about intention engineering. So the conscience part is about intention and values and alignment, those kind of things. The last bit is consciousness, which is, who is this serving, in terms of your identity, the person that you are. This kind of marries a little bit with the idea of role in other prompt engineering frameworks, but it goes up to a much higher common denominator kind of level, if you like. It relates to the humanity within them. It relates to what is it that's authentic and what is it that they're trying to be true to. That's what that part's about. So when you put the 4 C's together, you've got content, the context that content is going to be serving. Then the conscience is the values that context is serving. And then consciousness is the ultimate identity and nature that conscience is answering to and being accountable towards. So in the carousel that I put out, I gave examples of this structure for use in lots of different domains, for coaching, for mentoring, for teaching, organizational change and development, therapy. And, so there were 7 areas and there's 3 examples in each. So 21 examples how you can use this. And I hope that it's one of those frameworks that gets used alongside all the other ones for other kinds of situations. But the aim was to help people to start using AI in a way which started to have a more humanity-centric kind of intent behind it, and that served a higher level of consciousness within people rather than just being content-oriented, be consciousness-oriented.
Obviously, you can use that framework in any, even in your conversations with others. And it's a simple framework to remind us, even in our coaching, that, all the questions that you put out there, we're very much around bringing awareness to, what we're talking about, what is the intention behind it, who are you serving, what is going on inside you, and what is the context of that. It's critical thinking at its best. And I think that's where a lot of people maybe over-engineer critical thinking. But, your framework to me was almost helping someone think
It's layered, and
critically through it.
it clearly, the things that are at the beginning, the content stuff, that's absolutely the
Yeah,
lower common denominator thinking. And then as
right.
you climb up, I did say it's to do with increasing richness as you go up the seas. As you go through context and conscience and consciousness, you're slowly getting to the higher common denominators. And you're
Yes,
making sure the AI is being
yes,
prompted from the highest possible place within yourself.
yes. And as you were saying, yes, it's almost like we need to start thinking ourselves a little bit more in those from those mindsets and
It's the old
perspective,
garbage in,
because
garbage out
when
thing, isn't it?
garbage in, garbage out. But as you said, and bringing it back into the mindset and how we want to master our own mindset and our own skill set, and not give that away. Even that framework for me is like, well, fantastic. I can actually start thinking through those layers and increase my own
Instead of
awareness of
garbage
how
in,
I'm
garbage out,
thinking
now
before I
it's humanity in, humanity out, right?
get it right in your own mind, in the right framework, and then prompt the AI, which
Well,
then,
then maybe
as you
people
said, will
won't
bring.
feel driven to get to situations where they're dying by suicide and causing self harm. And if I look at OpenAI and other AI producers out there, I'm going, how many of them have created an interface and architecture where humanity can be entered and humanity comes out? Right now, unfortunately, when you're relevance oriented, you end up working with the lowest common denominators in how you connect with people. But when you're resonance oriented, then you start working with the highest and deeper common denominators between people. And that's what I've always wanted. Now, you need relevance to
Yes.
connect people in the first instance, right? Because people often connect by their interests and their preferences and their behaviors. That's just nature of human beings.
Mm.
But eventually, you also want to connect them into the deeper relevance factors of what their real intentions are behind their interests, their priorities behind their preferences, and their deeper way of authentic being behind their surface behaviors. Now, when you have both of those things, that's when you begin to have an opportunity to really connect with the full humanity with a person rather than just what's on the surface and personality oriented. And it's just going to
Mm.
create an echo chamber.
Yeah. So resonance again. So it kind of goes back again to when we are focused on resonance, which is energy, rather than, as you said, relevance, which is just information, perhaps, or the transactional
Well,
nature
resonance
of how it
requires
might be.
coherence. It requires alignment. It
Yeah.
requires congruence as well. And when you work with an AI in
Mm.
a way that's, in the most basic way, you want to generate content which is coherent and congruent, right? Ideally, the context is also congruent and has some coherence to it. And you want that congruence and coherence to also be sustained all the way up those levels of, consciousness, if you will. When you stop being coherent and you stop being congruent, then that's usually when you start doing things that are unethical, right?
So I think every one of these topics, they're interconnected, and yet they open up a whole world of different sort of concepts that I think we need to connect them all together. And if we think about mindset, how much of it do you think is to do with the mindset that we come into this world of working with AI that really influences what we learn, how we see this, how we work together, and which direction we're taking each other?
Well, if you look at generative AI, that very word generative means that it's generating something. And I pointed out to some coaches recently, I said, look, when human beings develop their intelligence, their consciousness, they kind of do it through four stages. The first thing is they receive information from the world through their senses, from their client, whatever, right? There's a reception stage. The reception stage is followed by a perception stage where, okay, whatever you receive, you're trying to perceive what it means and trying to get an understanding of what it or all these things are. The next step up from perception is conception, where you join up all your perceptions together into hopefully some kind of construct, some kind of thing that means something to you. And the last stage following conception is generation. Now, interestingly, an AI works through exactly the
Mm.
same stages. It receives data, it
Yes.
tries to make sense of it and pays attention to certain things through perception, and then it forms concepts and then it generates some output. It does exactly the same thing, right? So there's a parallel there, but there's a unique difference, which is human beings, they kind of have their own light, if you like. They know how to illuminate themselves on the inside through their own intent, right? And unfortunately, AIs are not driven by intentions. They are driven by attention. They don't take into account intention. You have to give it the intention.
Not yet,
Not
as you
yet, no.
said. Not yet.
Even if you look under the hood, the actual AI has got these things called attention headers. Whenever you put stuff into it, it tries to find the thing it should be paying attention to. That's its thing, right?
Interesting.
But it's not intention oriented. And once we get AIs to start being able to work with our intentions, that's going to be one step forward. But even before intention, as I've said, if you look at context, which is what intention's linked to, above that is conscience and consciousness. AIs don't have a conscience yet. They certainly don't have consciousness yet. OpenAI just recently tried to put in constraints and guardrails to help protect people's mental health because all the issues that have been happening around suicide around it. So they're only just starting to grow a bit of a conscience, if you like. But we're a long way away from consciousness, which some people are saying, oh, look, my AI is demonstrating signs of consciousness. You haven't even got a conscience yet. How can you possibly say it's got consciousness?
Another thing they don't have stress and anxiety and fear. Yes,
they do get locked in feedback loops, which are the equivalent of anxiety. And I know Anthropic, who produced Claude AI, they hired someone recently specifically to look after the welfare of Claude and any hallucinations that might be, if a regular human being started hallucinating, we'd think there's some kind of mental health or psychiatric problem, right? Well, AIs have been doing it for ages, and they're not regarding those as psychiatric problems, oddly. But now people are beginning to realize, oh, maybe it is actually demonstrating the equivalent of a psychiatric pathology, and we need someone to look after it.
I love how you draw all the parallel. Almost like every time I'm listening, I'm learning that there is a parallel almost with everything that we experience. That there is almost like a similarity, and yet there's a difference between how we operate and how AI operates. And what is some of the I would love to get some tips, advice from a coach's perspective on how to navigate this new era as coaches who are, we've spent a lot of our years learning about the competencies of coaching, applying that in the industry, and yet lots is changing. And while this technology is helping with a lot, it's also bringing a massive threat in terms of what happens to the industry. So what are your advice in terms of
well, first, recognize one thing. The training you got in competencies in coaching, traditionally, historically, those competencies were designed for human-to-human exchanges. They were never designed for human-to-AI exchanges. So if you think you can just transplant those competencies in how you work with AI, you're mistaken. It's like trying to transplant an organ from a pig into a human. It won't just get accepted. There will be rejection issues. There really will be. And it could end up killing the host organism right in the process. So you've got to be really careful to recognize that your existing competencies might not necessarily be fit for purpose when it comes to human to AI exchanges. The other thing I just want to say as a closing point, it's kind of reassuring in a way, and also gives coaches a guide as to what they should be focused on is, I said to someone recently that if you practice like a robot and work like a robot, expect to be replaced by one. You got to be able to draw on your humanity if you want to survive in an age of robots and AI. And these things don't have humanity. You do. And when it comes to the most advanced technology in a room, where you're sitting there with an AI, it's not the AI. The AI is not the most advanced technology in the room. There's something with billions of years of data sets and millions of years worth of algorithms that even has empathy and compassion and consciousness in the room. And that is the most advanced technology in the room. And that is your humanity. And if you don't draw on your humanity first as a technology in conversations with people in the world, then you're not really being very smart. Draw on your own humanity first. Okay, and then maybe bring in the AI to refine and expand on and enrich and elevate that humanity. If you do it the other way around, you're going to be ending up more and more like the AI, more and more like the robots than you are in terms of elevating yourself in terms of your consciousness and the consciousness and insight and empowerment agency of your clients. So please use the most advanced technology in the room first, and that's your humanity, not the AI. And then bring in the AI to augment, to advance, and then you'll be honoring the most sacred thing there is about you.
Yeah, and I think that's a great tip for coaches, leaders, almost everybody who's in the workforce and or in any industry. Going back to what we said at the beginning, the humanity centric mindset and mentality that we need to almost embody as we're going through this new age. Thank you so much. I will share all sorts of links on how people can read about your thought leadership and your work. And I really, really appreciate everything you're doing and the time that you've given me.
Thank you, Sanaz, for inviting me today. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
All right. Bye, Jazz.
Bye.